This right here is Johnson & Johnson. Headquartered in the state of New Jersey, it is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the whole world. It's also one of the handful of companies that made a financial windfall during the years of the pandemic with their vaccine. In fact, the Janssen shot was making the company upwards of $740 million per quarter just in vaccine sales alone. That was, of course, before the shot was pulled off the market due to an elevated risk of serious blood clots being formed in vaccine recipients. However, having their vaccine pulled off the market might actually be the least of Johnson & Johnson's financial worries, given the fact that the company announced a willingness to pay a $6.5 billion settlement to nearly all of the pending lawsuits in America, claiming that their baby powder, as well as their talc powder products, cause people to develop ovarian cancer. Once enacted, this financial settlement will actually wind up being the fourth largest in U.S. history, right behind the $7.2 billion that Enron had to pay for defrauding their shareholders. However, aside from the sheer magnitude of the dollar amount itself, the story of how this $6.5 billion settlement came to be, as well as the legal maneuvering that Johnson & Johnson has been doing behind the scenes to try and shield themselves from all these different lawsuits, well, that is a fascinating story to say the least. And so let's go through it together. To start with, unbeknownst to most people, to this day, there have been tens of thousands of plaintiffs who have alleged that Johnson & Johnson's baby powder, as well as their other talc-based products, they contained asbestos and caused cancer. In fact, there was a Reuters investigation published 6 years ago, back in the year 2018, which found that Johnson & Johnson knew for decades that asbestos, which is of course a known carcinogen, was lurking in their baby powder as well as in their other cosmetic talc products. And even though in the year 2020, Johnson & Johnson stopped selling their baby powder products here in the United States, they, to this very day, maintain that they're innocent, that this whole cancer story is misinformation based upon unfounded allegations, and that their products are indeed safe. Although, take that in for a moment. Their official corporate stance is that they pulled these products from the shelves due to misinformation about them. But regardless of that stance, at this very moment, there are over 30,000 plaintiffs across the whole country, including women suffering from ovarian cancer, as well as people suffering from mesothelioma, who are in the process of suing Johnson & Johnson for damages. And these legal challenges, they are having a real financial toll on the company. In fact, Johnson & Johnson has spent well over $1 billion in legal fees alone, on top of approximately another $3.5 billion in financial settlements with individual plaintiffs. However, in order to limit their liabilities, as well as to shield their corporate assets, in October of 2021, Johnson & Johnson pulled a very, you can say, interesting legal maneuver. It's something that's colloquially known as the Texas legal loophole, or sometimes it's alternatively called the Texas two-step defense. What they did was that Johnson & Johnson split themselves into two different companies, one of which was Johnson & Johnson, and the other one they called LTL Management LLC. They then took all the baby powder liabilities and moved it to this new company. And then subsequently, they had that new company file for bankruptcy, which meant that all of the different cases and trials that were pending were halted, awaiting a bankruptcy settlement. And so let me just repeat again how this all played out in practice. Johnson & Johnson, which was at the time worth around $400 billion, they were looking to shield the bulk of their assets from all these different lawsuits, accusing them of causing cancer in consumers. That's because the plaintiffs were, of course, trying to sue the main Johnson & Johnson company itself. And so, in order to shield themselves and to generally protect their corporate assets, they split themselves into two separate entities. On the one hand, you had Johnson & Johnson Consumer Incorporated, which was, of course, the parent company of brands that you probably know of, like Neutrogena, Band-Aid, Listerine, Splenda, Visine, Tylenol, etc. The second company they called LTL Management LLC, and that company was given the baby powder products, the ones that are currently being sued. And then, right after that company was created, it almost immediately filed for bankruptcy, meaning that, for one, not only were all the lawsuits put on hold as the bankruptcy proceedings were playing themselves out in court, which they knew could take months or perhaps even years, but also the amount that the plaintiffs suffering from cancer can actually get was substantially less. That's because they were no longer suing the parent company, Johnson & Johnson, but rather a smaller subsidiary. Now, at this point, you might be asking yourself the next logical question. What is the difference in terms of dollar amount that the plaintiffs could reasonably expect to get after Johnson & Johnson pulled off this legal maneuver? Well, consider this. Back in the year 2021, when Johnson did this, they promised to fund LTL Management LLC with at least $2 billion to be spread across all the different claimants, meaning that out of the 34,600 lawsuits that were working their way through the courts, the max that these people could collectively get was $2 billion. And that might sound like a lot, but consider this other fact. Earlier in that year, in the year 2021, there were 22 women with ovarian cancer who won their lawsuit against Johnson & Johnson, and those women were awarded $2.12 billion in damages. That was just one lawsuit with 22 women, and the damages were $2.12 billion. However, after this new legal maneuver, the remaining 34,000 women would collectively have to share $2 billion. Here's how the company's lawyers described the decision back when they made it in the year 2021. Quote, "We are taking these actions to bring certainty to all parties involved in the cosmetic talc cases. While we continue to stand firmly behind the safety of our cosmetic talc products, we believe resolving this matter as quickly and efficiently as possible is in the best interest of the company and all stakeholders." On the flip side, however, you had the lawyers representing the women in these particular cases calling this legal maneuver despicable. Here was a statement from the CEO of the American Association for Justice, which was the group representing the plaintiffs. Quote, "The Johnson & Johnson bankruptcy gimmick is as despicable as it is brazen and an unconscionable abuse of the legal system." The lawyers for the plaintiffs, they actually asked multiple judges to prevent Johnson & Johnson from being able to execute this legal maneuver, but they were all turned down. And so, once Johnson & Johnson did this, once they split companies and had that company file for bankruptcy back in the year 2021, they have been working to negotiate a global settlement with all these tens of thousands of women all at once. Essentially, what they've been trying to do is have one large settlement instead of thousands of individual trials. The company, meaning Johnson & Johnson, they claim that this will not only guarantee money to the women, but will also release them from any further liability. And so, for the past 3 years now, this legal process has been dragging itself along, costing hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees. This then brings us neatly along to the present day, wherein, just yesterday, Johnson & Johnson issued a $6.5 billion proposal to settle nearly all of these outstanding cases. Quote, "Johnson & Johnson has proposed paying $6.5 billion to resolve claims against the company and its affiliates in the United States that its branded talc products, including baby powder, caused ovarian cancer." The pharmaceutical giant announced the proposed settlement figure in a press release on Wednesday, noting the amount would be paid over 25 years to settle the ovarian cancer cases, which have been fast piling up.
What's up, everybody? This is Anthony Watson, contributor for Turning Point USA and now Happy Deplorable. And here, as an Olympian that is now working for Turning Point, all of these good ideas require hydration. But not with that garbage. I'm talking about this, Freedom 2.0. The new water and new sponsor of Turning Point USA that not only allows you to exercise creativity, but have good hydration in the process. What's up, ladies? Hey! Now, with everybody else that is not only protecting freedom of speech, you can actually do it in everything that you drink right now. So, it's not just a creative concept, it's also something that you can drink and taste. So get yours at freedom20.com.
You can try it for yourself over at freedom20.com and use promo code ROMAN to save 15% off. Again, that's promo code ROMAN for 15% off. Meaning, as a practical matter, that even within this proposed settlement, it would still take 25 full years for the cancer victims to get their money. However, it's also worth noting that according to the company statement outlining this proposed settlement, this $6.5 billion figure will exclusively cover 99.7% of the pending ovarian cancer cases, meaning that this figure does not cover a number of other financial liabilities as well, which include the remaining pending personal injury lawsuits relating to mesothelioma, the state consumer protection claims, as well as some of the miscellaneous lawsuits brought forth by some of the talc suppliers for the company. All of those are not included in this $6.5 billion figure. But when you actually add them up, the company mentioned that they have earmarked roughly $11 billion to address all the different talc-related litigation. Although it is important to mention that despite earmarking this $11 billion to settle all these lawsuits, the company stands by the safety of the talc-related products. Here's specifically what they wrote further down in that very same notice announcing the $6.5 billion settlement proposal. Quote, "The company reiterates that none of the talc-related claims against it have merit. The claims are premised on the allegations that have been rejected by independent experts as well as governmental and regulatory bodies for decades. Additional information on the company's position and the science supporting the safety of talc is available at www.factsabouttalc.com. Although, as you might have guessed, when you actually go to that website and look into it, it is in fact run by Johnson & Johnson themselves. Regardless of that though, in terms of the next steps, this proposal needs to be accepted by at least 75% of the plaintiffs in the remaining pending ovarian cancer lawsuits. Quote, if 75% of claimants vote in favor of the plan, a company's subsidiary may file a consensual prepackaged Chapter 11 bankruptcy to secure its confirmation. And as a practical matter, most likely the plaintiffs in these lawsuits will accept these terms, because as Johnson & Johnson makes a special point to remind them, going to trial against them is a arduous task, to say the least. Here's specifically what Johnson & Johnson wrote as a part of their statement to the cancer victims. Quote, the plan commits the company to pay ovarian claimants a present value of approximately $6.475 billion to be paid over 25 years, which is a far better recovery than the claimants stand to recover at trial. Most ovarian claimants have not recovered and will not recover anything at trial. Indeed, the company has prevailed in approximately 95% of ovarian cases tried to date, including every ovarian case tried over the last 6 years. In addition, based upon the historical run rate, it would take decades to litigate the remaining cases, and therefore, most claimants will never have their day in court. You know, something tells me that if we can rewind the clock back 10 or 15 years, when you had all those tens of thousands of women standing there at the supermarket aisle and putting the baby powder and the makeup into their shopping carts, well, none of them had any idea that they would eventually be looking at a letter like this and having to make a decision as to whether or not go to court or just to accept this settlement. Despite the fact that, of course, these talc-based products have no connection to cancer whatsoever. You can learn more about that at www.factsabouttalc.com. Regardless, that is the current situation with this settlement. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, if it goes through, this settlement will be the 4th largest in American history. And if you'd like to read more about these terms, including the investigative report from Reuters that kicked this whole thing off about 6 years ago, I'll throw the links to all my research notes. You'll be able to find them down in the description box below if you want to dive further into the weeds. And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.